5 times 15.
Okay, hello everyone, my name's Jessie, I'm one of the producers and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this beautiful venue for a 5x15 tonight. We may all be bedraggled, the rain may have been biblical, but I can sense a genuine hint of haggitude and mischief in the air, so I think we're in for a really good night. So, we are here tonight for a deep dive into the menopause and to learn from the wise women of European folklore and literature from two extremely wise women who share the stage tonight, Dr. Sharon Blackie and Kate Muir. Sharon Blackie is a psychologist, a mythologist, and an award-winning author of both fiction and non-fiction. Her signature interweaving of myth, landscape, personal story, and ecofeminism has earned her a cult following. She is a rallying cry and an inspiration for women to radically rewrite their midlife and elder years. Her latest book, Wise Women, which draws on the mythic archetypes and figures that will be familiar to fans of haggitude, was published on the 3rd of October, and we'll be hearing more about that tonight. Kate Muir is a women's health expert, a documentary maker, and an author of best-selling books on the menopause and the pill. As well as writing the book, Everything You Need to Know About the Menopause, she pitched and produced two groundbreaking documentaries presented by Davina McCall for Channel 4. Kate's campaigning work has created profound change in women's health in the UK, smashing stigma and bringing the menopause conversation to the mass audience. We are so honoured to have you both here. Thank you very much. We're going to be going straight through for an hour without an interval, so please do feel free to use the loos. One of them isn't working, but you can use the one on the right. And we're going to have 45 minutes of discussion and then questions from you. So, without further ado, can we have a big round of applause for Sharon Blackie and Kate Muir.
Now you're on tour talking about Wise Women, your new book, which is a whole series of myths that you've gathered. And they're myths that we need, I think, to get through this time in our life and many times in our life. And I'm really interested because I'm coming from a sort of completely different world of science and not archetypes, but I'm really interested in there being these amazing figures that are going to give us confidence to change our lives and transform ourselves and question ourselves. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about why you decided to gather what you gathered together and tell us a story as well.
Okay. Welcome to the cult, by the way. Lovely to see you all here. Now I'm losing my voice just in the nick of time. So I suppose why fairy tales particularly, because a lot of the stories in Wise Women and a lot of the stories that I gathered for Haggitude are fairy tales as well as myth. And these are the stories of the folk, so these were often stories that were told by women, working class women, to other working class women. And they knew about all of life's difficulties and challenges. And they begin with an impossible situation, and by the end of the story, something has transformed. And so when I was a child, I needed to hear that, coming from a fairly challenged background, I needed to hear that impossible situations could be turned to something that was a little bit more functional. And so I always loved story. When I got to 50, which was a point really of my own menopause, I was looking for some idea of what I was supposed to do with the rest of my life, given that the average age expectancy might be 80 these days. What am I going to do with 3 decades? Okay, can you turn me up? Okay, all right, how is that?
That's
okay. Okay, so when I got to 50, I was wondering what the stories were that I was supposed to live by. I couldn't really find any really great stories that the culture was going to offer me. I mean, clearly there are some role models, but really there isn't kind of a plan, I think, for women as they move into elderhood. People would really very much rather we just sat in a corner and shut up and, were nice, and that's not how I thought that I would spend the next 30 years. So in that kind of situation, it's natural to me to go back to old stories because I do think that our ancestors had some wisdom that we might have forgotten along the way. And so that's when I started to look for older women in folk tales and mythology. Because also we have this sense that, you know, if you ask somebody, well, what older women do you remember in fairy tales, they'll say the Wicked Witch and the Evil Stepmother. And I knew from my own tradition, and you will know from the Scottish tradition, we both share, and the Irish tradition, that there's very much more than that. So I went looking, and it was a 5-year research project, you know, going through musty old volumes of folk and fairy tales and mythology to see if I could find the old women. And the great thing was, I found quite a lot. And in Wise Women, for example, there are 32 different stories, and every one of those women is wise in a different kind of way. So there's a huge diversity. There's not just one way to move into a meaningful adulthood.
And what I like about most of them is they are detached from being a mother or a girlfriend or they are people, you know, and that's really, really important. Tell us the story, the first story in the book.
Okay, I will, but just to say that, one of the reasons why I use the word hag in Hagitude and why I'm very fond of it is that when you see women in these stories who are called hags, they're always precisely that. They're in the story because of who they are. They're not in the story because they're somebody's grandmother or somebody's wife or somebody's mother. They might be, but that's not why they're in the story. They're in the story because they're special. The first story that I just want to talk about a little bit is actually a story which illuminated midlife for me, and perhaps menopause too, which is clearly one of the key things that we're here to have a conversation about. And it's a story that I found in the Siberian tradition. I'm quite happy to colonize Siberia for Europe. I normally just work with European myths and fairy tales. It's kind of European. And it's a story that, to me, really illuminated what happens at midlife and what continues to happen all the way through perimenopause and into menopause, which is a period of profound transformation. And the story goes like this, just very briefly. I'm not going to tell you the whole thing because it will take too long. But a woman and a man have been married for a very, very long time. And every morning he leaves the house and he comes back in the evening and she has absolutely no idea what he does. None at all. And one day she decides that that's not good enough. She wants to know. All of a sudden she needs to know what he does all day. So she follows him. And she follows him as he passes into the forest, finds a clearing, sits on a log, and stays there all day. That's what he does all day. And so she thinks to herself, okay, I have no idea who this man is, I have no idea what my life is, what I'm doing here, and so she decides to leave. So she walks down the road, and she hasn't got very far before she runs into a giant. And the giant, as a giant will do, picks her up, slings her over his shoulder, runs with her to the top of a mountain, and deposits her in a cave, and then goes away again. And not surprisingly, she's a bit frightened, she's crying, she doesn't know, it wasn't what she had planned. And all of a sudden she hears a voice say, look up, stop crying, look up, and you'll see the skins of land birds above you. So she looks up, and there's a ledge, and she sees something black and feathery, and she pulls it down, and it's a coat made of crow feathers. But it doesn't fit her. So she cries again, and everything is very desperate, and then she hears the voice again saying, stop crying, look up, and you'll see the skins of land animals above you. So she looks up, and there's another ledge, and there's something lovely and red, and she pulls it down, and it's a coat made of fox skins, and it does fit her. So all of a sudden she's warm, feels very brave. She decides to make a run for it before the giant comes back. By the time, to cut a bit of a long story short, by the time she gets to the bottom of the mountain, she has a pair of russet-tipped fox ears and a snow-tipped fox tail. And by the time she gets back to her village, she is full-on vixen. And she sees her father go off to fish. He's out at sea in his canoe. And she thinks, I'll go back to my father's house because, I know it's safe, it's warm, and I'll figure out what to do. But every time her fox head tries to go through the door of her father's house, her body swivels around and will not let her go in. And so she trots away across the field to whatever new life lies ahead. So to me, that's not a story that says you have to leave your husband at midlife. It's not. You don't actually have to leave anything physical behind, but something will be left behind at midlife. Something has to give in order to move on to the new story that lies beyond in the second half of life. So that's one of my favourite stories, because it's just that image, that really kind of encapsulates that big transformation.
And going back to the natural. I like the bit in your other books, in when women rise rooted, about alchemy as well, and that, in the Jungian sense, you burn down to just the bare bones of your life, in menopause and in perimenopause, and you have to experience that kind of lowering and crushing in order to rise up and become a new creature, as we hope to do. And I also was looking at that, and you're big on Jung, actually, aren't you? But I was looking at that in the sort of transformational sense of what actually happens to hormones, and the idea that when your estrogen, your happy hormone, the serotonin-connected hormone, and when your progesterone, which keeps you calm and sleepy and nice and lets you, your husband can do what he likes, and suddenly you want to kill your husband because of the sound he makes when he eats crisps. At that moment, your hormones have changed, and you are burnt down to the bone, and you're often very, very angry. And I know you also talk about the rage that sort of righteous rage, because suddenly you see the world clearly, I think, at this point. And although it can be horrible, it can also be this huge gift being made kind of just plain and ordinary. And you have to decide, what will I do next? And I like the way that story kind of takes that in.
Yeah, I mean, Jung, Carl Jung, who is an influence on all depth psychologists, for better or worse, had this very strong concept of the first half of life being kind of outward focused. You're building a persona, you're building a family or a career or, whatever, at home, whatever it might be that you're building, because you are looking at presenting yourself in the world, to the world. And the second half of life for Jung was when you wake up one morning or several mornings and think, okay, what's this all about really? What is this for? So it's a kind of search for meaning. It's kind of a spiritual search. And of course for women it's punctuated by the cataclysm that is menopause. And so it's not that we can... It's very, very difficult to ignore that call to a second half of life. And hormonally, I mean, one of the things that I love about some of the stories that I uncovered is they have a lot of older women who do not any longer think that being nice is a life goal, And it's just because, as you say, the kind of nurturing hormones, the kind of empathy hormones are just, they've gone.
Yeah.
And it's not that you have to be actively unpleasant, but there is this sense of just not taking any crap anymore.
Yeah. And also, Jung did talk about, they didn't know about hormones then, but he talked about the masculine aspect of the woman and the feminine aspect of the woman and the masculine and feminine aspect of the man. And as a man comes to midlife, he becomes more feminine, Jung says, and as the woman comes to midlife, she becomes more masculine and starts running shops and things like that. He was quite slightly horrified by that she had the sharpness of her mind and that she was running shops. And there is that slight feeling of something more masculine happening and not really giving a fuck.
Exactly, exactly. And it's interesting, I talk a lot because I'm very focused on kind of our native European traditions and what they tell us about how to live. And so I have a couple of Native American elder friends, and we share stories quite a lot. And that is precisely, so I have a friend who is part of the Penobscot people in Maine, and they still have a kind of matrifocal society. How they've retained that in modern day America, I don't know, but they never quite lost it. And that is exactly how they see what happens to men and to women post-midlife. That the men, are kind of coming into their gentler phase while the women are coming into their fiercer phase, and it's a kind of rebalancing act. But she says it works beautifully.
Yeah. I'm really interested in the way and I know you've done lots of neuroscience, in the way the brain actually changes in menopause, and looking at it within the context of the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we're now relearning from you. But I didn't understand that basically your brain changes fuel in menopause, which was a huge thing for me, that you're running on a kind of estrogen glucose mechanism. It disappears and you have to pump more blood to your brain later on, and your grey matter goes down and then goes up again at the other side of menopause. But in the middle, it's absolute chaos. And that moment of wildness in your brain, and I was talking to you earlier, I had incredible memory loss in my perimenopause, and I was writing a shopping list one day and I was writing down the word shaver, and I thought, definitely another word for that thing. And then 15 minutes later I remembered the word razor, and literally I thought I had Alzheimer's at that point. And, rang all my friends and indeed got on hormone replacement therapy and got my memory back. But these shocking moments of being left raw and frightened and losing parts of your brain, and then the grey matter comes back, and depending on whether you take hormones or not, it still seems to come back up. But your brain has changed, and we have these plastic brains that change at, puberty, change if you get pregnant, rewire in a different way. This is our third rewiring. And it's so not being acknowledged in literature, in life, and we are looking for these stories that will explain our rewiring. And that's very much when I'm reading what you write about.
Yeah, I think if fairy tales, particularly if fairy tales tell us anything, it's that women are intended to transform again and again and again. And we see this, we see adolescents transforming, we see mothers transforming, or people in the motherhood years transforming, and we see older women being something completely different. And the problem that we face, for sure, I think, when we're trying to think of what stories we live by in elderhood, is that we're not warned, are we, that this happens. Nobody tells us that this happens. Nobody says that you get to this point, which I often think about as a time between stories. You get to this time, and it could be years long, where everything seems to hang in the balance, and you don't really know what's going on. But afterwards, it's going to be great, And post-menopause for me is absolutely, I've had some challenges, but it's absolutely been the best part of my life in very, very many ways. And women, if only women were told that and given some kind of inspirations for the kind of elder we might become, which is where the stories come in, then I think life would be very different for us.
I think you're right. I also like the vast scale of some of the stories that you have redug up and brought to us. And my favourite story, partly because my family come from that bit of Scotland originally, is the kayak, and who is this giantess of the West Coast or of Ireland, who literally bestrides the landscape, creates the landscape. Tell us a bit about her, because she's just my top favourite.
Yeah, she's mine as well. And it's just kind of, we don't have in our tradition, we don't have creation myths. We probably did, but they just weren't written down. So we've lost the creation myths that tell us how the universe was created, but we do have these stories, and there are traces of them in England as well. I mean, it's better preserved in Ireland and Scotland, but there are traces in Wales and in England of these giantesses. And the Cailleach, which is a word that literally means old woman in Gaelic and Irish, is the creator, shaper of the landscape. So there are all kinds of stories throughout Scotland where she's just, trotting across the land before it was formed, and she's got rocks here and she's carrying them about in a pinny, and she trips up and she spills the rocks, and oh look, there's a mountain range, and she takes a little hammer and she chips away at it. But the other thing about the Cailleach, and a lot of the giantesses like her that we see, is not just that she has this kind of sense of being there since geological time, creating the land, but she's also a guardian and protector of the natural world. So she's the one that will tell the hunter, Donald, it's always a Donald, you may not take a pregnant hind. You may not take a pregnant hind. If you leave my hinds alone in season, I'll give you a stag. So there's this sense of an old woman standing firm and saying, no, enough. and keeping it all in balance. And, you know, in a world that's so full of environmental and ecological catastrophe, we need that kind of role model, I think, very badly. So I love that. I love that figure.
I also just physically love the size of her, because I can really imagine it. And there's a whirlpool at the end of Jura, between Jura and Scarborough, and it's the second largest whirlpool in the world, and it's called the HYFYV, and you may have heard of it. And she kind of sits on the mountain beside that and takes off her shawl, which has got a bit grubby because she's been running over, you know, building landscapes, whatever, and then puts her shawl into the HYFYV like a washing machine and takes it out. It's all clean and white, and she puts it on top of, like, I don't know, the Paps of Jura or the nearest mountain, and suddenly there's snow on the top of the mountains. And I just love the vastness of that figure. And I really didn't know about her until, in fact, I had a house on the island of Gia, and we've got two tiny little stones. We've got the kayak and the bodach, which is a little woman and a little man. And in photos, they look absolutely huge. But when you arrive, they're like, oh, they're really, really tiny. But I just loved the power of that. And I thought, how did I go through a Scottish childhood without knowing about that?
Well,
and,
yeah, I think the difference between us and say other indigenous cultures, and certainly Native American cultures, is when they tell those stories, they're presented as cosmologies. You know, they're presented as belief systems. We get them presented as fairy tales, maybe to entertain kids. And we're not seeing the stories in the same way, and we should, because that's what they were. You know, that was part of our ancestors' belief system. And the kayak is for sure descended from one of several very old goddesses. You know, we talk a lot about the Great Mother Goddess in Europe, and a lot of people have done research onto that, but mostly we have Great Grandmother Goddesses, who were these creators and shapers and guardians and protectors. And the other thing that I love about them is they're not kind of transcendental, twinkly, sequin sky goddesses, you know, they're very earthy, they're very wild. And they have this immense power to keep the world moving, to keep it in balance, and to keep us living in balance and harmony with it.
One of the things I'm really interested about you, and it's slightly off the wise woman myth, is the fact that you have to personally move into different landscapes. And we all get this desire, I think, at this point in our lives to change where we are. And you have moved to Lewis, to Cumbria, to Ireland, to America, to Wales. I don't know if I've got them all. But anyway, at least the hands, you know, you really have gone to search for that piece of landscape that connected you to something, and be it a myth or... So tell us about some of those, particularly the Scottish ones in Cumbria. Why did you go and have to find your place at this point?
I think I thought I'd found my forever place twice. Once on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, and once before that, actually, in northwest Highlands of Scotland. And for reasons that weren't my doing entirely, I ended up leaving them. And I think it kind of, there's a part of me that kind of broke when it came to foreverness in place. I didn't really believe in place as a forever thing anymore. And I started thinking about, instead, places that seemed to be drawing me to them, that had something, that had some lesson to teach me. So I'm very much into the archetypes of place. You know, so the Isle of Lewis and the Outer Hebrides is very bleak. It's all about endurance. You've got the oldest rock on the planet there. Now, you can tolerate that for some while, but it's very, very serious. And I think there are times when you need to learn about bleakness and endurance, and there are times when you need to be by a really soft-flowing river in the hills of Donegal to kind of recover and to learn something else. And so I always think that place has been my biggest teacher. And I don't necessarily intend to move, but I do just seem to be kind of drawn to different places. And when I get there are stories in the land, and the landscape itself has different qualities, and I come away different. So it's not intentional, but I think it's just how it is for me. Whereas other people get their biggest teachings from community, from human community. I get mine from the land and the kind of qualities that it reflects back at me.
We were talking earlier about this time of life, and that this is the point at which it really helps to kind of find your purpose or find your calling. And, you know, when we go through these crises or fantastically smooth transitions, I don't know anyone who's actually done that, but, you know, that you have to find your calling. Tell me a little bit about how you found this mythical world as your calling. I mean, at what point did that come to you, the storytelling?
I think it was there when I was a child because, as I said, fairy tales and myths were kind of what saved me. When I had a bit of a roundabout kind of 20s and 30s, I had a digression into corporate life, and I came back to study psychology again when I was around 40, and found that a lot of the classic psychology techniques, just were not capturing people's imagination. They were boring, and it was very, very difficult to create change with people. But if you used fairy tales, if you used story, and you could capture the imagination and give people an image and characters to work with, then all of a sudden change seemed to be inevitable, not just possible. And so I think I always felt that was where the world, the stories were the kind of, that's what the world turns on. The world turns on stories and the images in them. And one of the reasons why I love collecting stories like I did for Hagitude and Wise Women is that because of that diversity, I think each one of us can find an old woman in a story somewhere that reflects a kind of gift that we have. And that old concept of calling isn't about your job or your profession. Can be, but that's not what it's about. What it is about is your own way of uniquely being human in the world. You know, these ideas go all the way back to Plato, that we each come here with a particular way of being human that is unique to us, that the world will never see again, and that it's kind of our job to express it, whatever it might be. It could be a very small thing, it could be a very big thing. And I think what I love about fairy tales, and the older women fairy tales, is they give us a real range of ways of being uniquely human, female, elder.
Yeah, I like the aspect of the fairy tales being a place to unearth your shadow, which we're supposed to unearth at this time, aren't we? And be authentic at a certain point. And because we have all, so many of us. Not everybody in the room has, had a marriage and children, but so many of us have subsumed ourselves for a huge period of time to fit a lot of other people around us, and we suddenly realise that our self is missing and we can't really sort of see it anymore, and that we have these dark sexual thoughts. We'd like to write a book, we want to travel, we want to, we're questioning, the class system that we've grown up in. Whatever it is, we are angry about things and questioning, and we suddenly, some of us, certainly people like me, I threw off an enormous lot, and then, I threw off, marriage, job, all sorts of things all at once, just everything out of the pram. And it was absolutely terrible. It was terrible for about 3 years. And then I got on to rebuilding. But it was almost looking at your kind of shadow side and the possibly appalling things you did or did not want to do that made me come back to kind of who I was originally, in a sense. But do you find that some of the stories do reveal that dark side of women and that burden that they've been holding for a long time?
Kind of, yes. I think, so there are lots of stories about older women who are nice and kind and who are mentors to younger women and who weave the world into being and do all of the good stuff. But there are also stories of women, older women, that do reflect the dark feminine, if we can think of it as that. And so a classic example of that is from the Slavic tradition, a wonderful old woman who clearly is the derivation of an old goddess. You can trace it back, I won't bore you with why, called Baba Yaga.
Oh, yes.
And Baba Yaga's ambiguity is her defining feature. So she's not all nice. It depends on how you approach her, and you will get what you deserve in Baba Yaga's eyes. So if you come and you do the housework, that's just a metaphor for just doing the work, basically, doing the apprenticeship, putting the work in, working hard, being respectful to the old lady and all of that kind of thing, then you'll leave carrying the fire. But if you don't, if you disrespect her and you're lazy and you tell lies about what you've been up to, then you'll get put in her man-sized oven and you'll be eaten. after you've been roasted. And I think that's fine. You know, again, it goes back to what we were talking about. I don't normally roast people, but it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that sense that, that being nice isn't your life goal. And what these older women are doing is actively selecting for values and behaviours that are going to make the world go around better and that are going to help you to thrive. It's not all about being a good girl, you know, it's just about things that make the world a better place. And yeah, they're serious about it. So we do have the kind of dark side, but it's always for good reason. It's never, it's unless you get an archetypical wicked witch, it's never just for the sake of being unpleasant.
Let me ask you a difficult question, which you've probably been asked a million times before, but all those words, hag, crone, witch, I think they've got joint problems. I always worry, you know, that they'll have, you know, that they'll have osteoporosis, they've got joint problems, they'll probably be a bit short-sighted. You know, I think of it as physical decay. Those words sort of ring to me, often evil, often physical decay. And then, you know, reading your book, you realise, oh my God, it's so much more complicated and interesting and fascinating than that. But then from the outside, we are looking at a generation of women who are looking for figures to look up for, powerful figures, and there are certain women who will be excluded by that language and almost fear of that language. And how do you approach that?
Fear of words like witch and hag?
Exactly.
I think it's about looking at what they mean and the qualities that they express. So as I said earlier, you know, hag to me is someone who very clearly is in the story for herself. She's in the story because of her own qualities, not because of relationship, because of that unique gift that she brings to the world. So that makes me very comfortable with the word hag. And I think if you contextualize some of these words, you can make sense of it. Back in the day, for literally centuries, witch was by definition malevolent. You were only a witch if you were malicious. If you did magic that wasn't malicious, you were a wise woman or a cunning woman. And yet we have completely revisioned the concept of witch over the past couple of centuries, and now people associate it with kind of the natural world and the kind of magic in the natural world, and it's become a positive thing. So I do think that a lot of these labels are about contextualizing, and it's always important to say what you mean, but I think there's a power in the old words that we wouldn't have if we just made up some new ones. And maybe that's just a kind of, you know, my own predilection for old stuff, old stories, and what have you.
Are there figures in modern day that you see as similarly powerful out in the world?
You mean individuals or
individuals or archetypes or...
I think all of the archetypes that I talk about, particularly in Haggitude, are still out there. So when I wrote Haggitude, which was kind of a precursor to Wise Women in some way, so Wise Women is kind of like the collected stories, and Haggitude was where I was looking at different ways of being elder and the archetypes. One of the things I tried to do was to find an example of an older woman, the kind of Kaliach idea that we were talking about of older women as guardians and protectors of the land. So there's a very wonderful American woman called Joanna Macy who founded something called The Work That Reconnects, which was before everybody started talking about nature reconnection. Joanna was like looking at how we might actually do this. And as an elder, I don't think she's in her 90 maybe even now, is still actively out there advocating for the natural world. So I think you can still see these archetypes. Probably not Baba Yaga. I don't know many people who would do the roasting in the oven.
Man-sized oven.
A man-sized oven. That one's a little bit more complicated. But on the other hand, there are women who are very fierce and who are, again, going to be insistent on, you know, finding the qualities in the world that they think are going to keep it turning. So I do see them, actually.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about just why you've settled where you've settled now. And what you're going to do next, because I think we're going to move into questions in a minute, but I just want you to throw forward where you are and what you're hoping this book will do in the world.
Yeah, so I moved after the many moves that you have spoken about. I realised that the one place I had never in my life that I had never come to terms with was the place that I was born, which was the far north east of England, County Durham. I loved the Scottish heritage, I loved the Irish heritage, but England, I wasn't too sure about that. and I figured that I needed to. So I moved back actually to the eastern side of Cumbria, kind of in the Pennines, to kind of make my peace with the place that I came from. And it has been a very wonderful experience because, again, what I'm finding are traces of, giantesses, for example, there's an odd boulder that was dropped by a giantess when she tripped over, and it's like, even in England, we tend to think that we don't have that. It's all Irish and Scottish. We still have the old stories. We still have traces of them. So it's been very kind of revealing and a little bit healing to find some of these folkloric characters, because I know the Scottish and the Irish traditions and other European traditions so well. I can kind of, I can see the traces now. So for me, that's been very fine. And as far as work is concerned, I'm never going to stop. Never. Say never. For the next book, at least, I'm still working with fairy tales, but with a completely different perspective on fairy tales, and very much more related to these values that they can instill in us about how to live in the world. I think there is still so much wisdom that we haven't uncovered in fairy tales, and it's kind of a mission to help people see them as kind of part of a thought system, part of a belief system, not just as cute stories.
I think you're so right, and I think around this time we so communicate with stories, and you tell someone your story and they go, that's not my story, and then someone else says their story, and then the fourth person comes along and they go, that's my story. And somehow that is incredibly healing. Story number 4 over there, and it is very good that you're doing that job for us. Now we can have questions. Do we have a roving mic?
We did have 2, but now we have 1.
Well, you have to run.
I'm sorry.
Shall I get to you?
Yeah, so has anybody got a question? Or a statement they wish to make about anything?
Are we on? I'll take the mic to anyone who has a question. If you want to raise your hand, I'll bring it to you.
There's one there.
Thank you, and thank you both, Kate and Sharon, for that brilliant introduction to Sharon's background and everything you've brought, and thank you so much for writing If Women Rose Rooted, because it basically changed my life, so thank you. One of the questions that I've been trying to work out recently, I don't know if anybody saw a Burger King advert recently, which was Burger King delivering burgers to pregnant women, to women who'd just given birth. And sort of, I work in marketing and communication, so very much in the corporate landscape. And everyone in my circle was like, oh my God, this is such an amazing, look, it's like women, being really kind of free to kind of eat burgers after they give birth. But they actually... And they teamed up with Mumsnet to do the research, and apparently 33% of women want a burger after they've given birth. But it was just, I had like an almost out-of-body experience because I'd kind of engaged with this deep story of the wasteland and kind of being torn away from these really natural sacred spaces. Even the fact that they'd said, they couldn't even call it Burger Queen, because the idea of eating a burger for a woman, I went down the spiral, went down the rabbit hole. And just in terms of like how, I guess, the advice you would give us to kind of stand up for that, it's a really complicated thing in the corporate world in particular, to sort of stand up and fight against that kind of ideology of where are the sacred spaces, is the the commodification, the commercialization of things like childbirth. How do we kind of rally and kind of tell these stories in different ways?
For me, if you look at it, and if you research it, proper change always comes from the bottom up. So we have this cultural mythology, and we don't think of it as a mythology, but it is a mythology. It's a set of stories that the culture tells us we must live by, and a set of things that the culture tells us we must value. And the culture, whatever we think of, the hierarchy, if you like, isn't going to change that. It's set in, unless it breaks, which is another story, but it's set in. It maintains itself. And the only way that you shift that is by choosing to move out of it. And I always call that falling out of myth. So you fall out of the culture and mythology and you say, I'm going to live by different stories and I'm going to live by a different set of values. I'm not talking about kind of cutting yourself off completely from the culture, from society. That's that's mostly impossible for everybody, I think, today. But just, laughing at that kind of thing rather than going along with it, telling different stories. The kind of stories that I'm working with, people love them when you tell them. It's not just some strange curiosity. It's very easy to draw people in with stories about different ways of being in the world. And I think the way that we change people's perspective on how to live is by living differently ourselves. And then, one person lives differently. Somebody around them sees that and it's like, oh, they're happy and that's a really great way to live, and they change as well, and it mushrooms. And that's really, in a nutshell, my recipe for cultural change. So I think it's about the way that we choose to live, the way that we choose to present ourselves, and the kind of example, in a sense, that we set. I don't know whether you have.
I'm not totally sure that's a bad example in many ways, because having given birth, really, really wanted to eat after 20 hours on the floor. And you really wanted to eat something strong and animally with lots of iron and meat in it. You were not going to have, muesli. So in a sense, I totally like that kind of raw, kind of funny animal aspect to that story, even though it is probably politically incorrect. Over there.
Thank you both so much. My question, I hope you can answer, is I am going through grief at the moment. I just lost my sister. And I was wondering if in your storytelling you had any examples of how women in their second life or in their wisdom, in their eldership, have navigated grief beyond the 5 stages, which is the thing I keep being quoted. Do you have anything on that?
Not really, because that's not necessarily the kind of thing they do. Do you know, they don't. It's very difficult to find stories for specific life events, just because that's not generally what folktales do. What folktales do is they look at kind of bigger transformations. I'm not saying that means that grief is small, but they can teach you how to present yourself in the world, how to be in the world, rather than how to navigate a particular situation. So there are no stories, for example, about divorce or navigating that kind of thing. The only thing that they tell you, and in a sense this is its power, even if it doesn't seem very helpful, is about these big transformations, that grief happens, but as a consequence of the grief, something beautiful emerges, because, as we were talking about earlier on, the grief is a kind of alchemical process by which something is burned away. And when you burn something back to the bone, there are a couple of questions that emerge. One is, what's left? What is the essence that's left after that's been burnt away? And also, what does it leave space for to move into the new story? So we're always talking at this kind of very generic level, but sometimes I think that's where the power of the stories are, rather than getting very, very specific.
I don't have anything much to add to that, other than Julia Samuel is absolutely fantastic on grief and all her work and her books and kind of post-traumatic growth. Very worth reading and listening to her podcast.
Sorry, who?
Julia Samuel. She's very, very good. And a man there. We'll have a woman first. Yes.
Hi, is it my turn? Hi, I'm going to stand up because I can't see you. Hi, both. Thank you very much. First thing I wanted to say is it felt like a really nice, you sort of got the scientific perspective and the stories perspective, and something that you said about rewiring the brain, and then sort of somehow Sharon rewilding the brain really stuck with me, so I'm going to sort of take that away with me. I have a feeling I might get the same answer to the question that I'm about to ask that the previous question had, actually. I feel like I've got one foot on both sides of this part of my journey at the moment. But I'm really drawn to all of these stories. But a lot of these stories have their female archetype on her own. And I know that this is a personal transformation and this sort of metamorphosis is a personal journey. But I'd love to know what you have to say about friendship and community around this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we just move out of the kind of domain of old woman stories for now, and we just look at fairy tale heroines more generally, there isn't a single fairy tale heroine that I have ever encountered who gets through from that impossible situation to the transformation alone. It's always an act of community. She never does it alone. She is not the swashbuckling hero intent on glory. And so there is always a human community that will help her out. There's the wise woman that often appears, for example, but there's also an other than human community. There's a talking horse or a bunch of hungry mice who will help her sort the seeds or whatever. So actually, or a tree that has a particular gift to give. So if you look at fairy tales, it's all about community. It's just that, and I think sometimes it's our way of looking that focuses us on the heroine because we've been told that we must focus on the hero, and the hero is very, very individualistic. It's all about him. And in fairy tales, it's not. It's always about community. Now, in any story, you have a protagonist. You have the person who is making the journey, but that doesn't mean to say that it's an individualistic story. And again, that's one of the things that I'm very focused on right now, is looking into fairy tales for kind of evidence of that. In the older woman context, you also see a number of women who are very much part of the community. So, the hen wife, for example, is a classic older woman that appears in stories to give advice, normally about marriage and kind of what we might think of as women's mysteries, to the heroine. She's always at the centre of the village. So although she's in the story herself, she's always at the centre of the village. So I think actually there is a huge amount of community in fairy tales, and it's just perhaps our focus that we've kind of forgotten how to see that maybe.
Mm. And I think the fact we're focusing right now around these books and this conversation, and I've also found in the last 5 years being a menopause warrior, that you walk into a room and people just tell you the truth immediately, and they probably do that to you too, in a way that didn't happen previously, and that is just, you get straight to the point, and I think that's really liberating. Our question over there.
Hi there. Just a quick thank you for how enlightening your stories were as to how important fantasy and these similar stories are for helping women conceptualize their own experience. But the question I wanted to ask you was, as you've gone through your own hormonal journey, shall we say, through perimenopausal transition to menopause, has it affected your artistic creativity, or the way your literacy or anything of that nature? Has it changed with your own hormonal change?
Yeah, definitely. Unlike Kate, who I know had a lot of cognitive problems that she's been talking, or memory problems that she's been talking about, I didn't have that. I had absolute, almost instant clarity. It's not that I didn't have other issues that were unsettling. I didn't have an easy menopause, but for me it was just like all of the hormones were the brain fog, and now they were gone or going. And so I think for me it really focused my mind absolutely on what I wanted to create, what I needed to create, what I was prepared to do, what I needed to leave behind because I didn't like it sometimes. I really, in that sense, I don't think I've looked back since. And I do know a number of women for whom that has happened, particularly at the point of menopause, which is, technically, obviously, the point at which you no longer, your last period. So you've gone through all of the difficulty of perimenopause. But I never had anything other than an intense kind of clarification of focus. And I don't know whether it's just the luck of the draw, what you get and what you don't get.
I think you were very lucky. I think 80% of people find that's not the case, but you do, and it often takes such a long time. I mean, I found that that's the case, that I'm so on the other side because my hormones are the same every day. So it's like getting into a Tesla. It's just like that. It's like, it's the first time in my whole life that, exactly the same as you, my hormones have been completely steady. I know what they're going to do every day, but I also know that I will be in good health because of, the fact that I'm probably not up for osteoporosis or arthritis or cardiac disease or maybe dementia as quickly as I would be because I'm getting my hormones back. And my next book, actually, that I'm writing is all about future health and the future of hormones for those of us who can take them and what difference they make to longevity. And I don't know what we're going to be, because you're a kind of new creature of this kind of post-hormonal place, and I am a different new creature running on different fuel in a sense, but we are both, you know, we're both ready to take everyone on, I think. We got another question there, anywhere you like.
I've got two sort of questions, but they're quite connected. They might. So the first one is, I in a running club, and we ran a menopause, like real kind of nuts and bolts, like what happens in menopause. And everybody that came were already in menopause or post-menopause. So the first question is, how do we reach younger women who are maybe quite busy with young kids? And I definitely didn't know anything about menopause when I went into it. It was terrifying, complete denial. So that's the first part of the question, is how do we kind of reach? I know that the work Davina McCall, that whole kind of documentary, has been really helpful. And the second part is, how do we deal with that kind of existential rage that we have in menopause? And I personally have done it by like kind of rationing my rage. So I will read one in basically 4 or 5 books I can read about, like, you know, the dark history of women and medicine and what the patriarchy did and whatever. But so I kind of ration it, I kind of eke it out so it doesn't take over. But yeah, anything to speak to either of those, and maybe they're connected, for example, for us mentoring younger women, and maybe that's part of channeling the rage into something helpful.
Let them release it. There is a thing called the menopause that's happening, which is millennials worrying about going into menopause. And they are much better informed than we were, and they are asking questions about this, that, HRT, and they also know what they might be hit by and are probably going to be much better equipped to handle it and not panic. But again, happening on TikTok, happening on Instagram, probably not happening so much with books. The rage thing, my personal advice, I had terrible rage in perimenopause when I was falling apart, and I had 3 kids, quite a complicated husband, and my mum was ill, and I had a full-time job on the Times. And I dealt with my rage by throwing things, but not at people, just at the wall. And I threw blue paint, poster paint, broccoli. No one is injured. A butternut squash, quite heavy. The butter dish, which broke with all the bits of butter in it, and a copy of Nigella's Christmas. And that was really successful in just clearing the air. So, you know, you could consider that.
In a more mythic sense. One of the characters, or set of characters that I love, are the 3 Furies from Greek mythology, because it's their job to be really angry, and they are 3 older women who go out there and get angry, and they hound people who have committed crimes, but they don't do that just for the hell of it. They do that so that the people will basically recognize what they've done and then kind of repent of it. And so I always see a lot of the rage that we feel in menopause is something that can be rooted, something that can be transformational. Again, rage can be a kind of alchemy, so that it's not just kind of, I mean, we're all going to do a bit of diffuse rage, like Kate, at some point, and that's fine and very, very evocative and very necessary. But I think also there's been quite a lot of writing about the power of women's rage, you know, the ways in which we can use it, we can take hold of it. It becomes a weapon, or it becomes a pen, whatever it might be, and we can use it for change. It's kind of like, you know, the truth teller kind of archetype, where you tell the truth when it matters, not just for the sheer hell of it, but when it matters, when it can change something. So,
another question? Huh? We've got time for like one more after this, I think.
Okay. Kate, it's interesting you were saying about HRT and about the millennials, because I just looked at my diary a couple of days ago in preparation for this and realised how shitty it was a few years ago, and how I now feel I'm on the other side of the mountain.
Tesla?
Yeah, definitely Tesla, I get that. But I was having a conversation yesterday with a friend who's been on HRT for 10 years, and the thing I'm slightly worried about is that people maybe think that everyone has to take HRT. And how do you know it's not a plaster on whatever stresses you're going through, or shitty divorce, or annoying kids, or whatever like that? And at what point, if you are on HRT, do you know then to come off it? Because it was horrible, but I'm glad actually that I didn't, because it wasn't that terrible, and now, as I said, I'm on the other side. So how do we know that people aren't going to be, everybody isn't going to think taking hormones is the only way we can get through this?
Well, you can see it's not. We are both sides of the story, but the new guidelines are that you don't ever have to stop taking HRT if you agree with your doctor on the NHS sort of website. You're taking transdermal HRT. It's your same hormones you had when you were younger. They're not synthetic, if you get the good kind.
But if you do want to stop, like my friend was yesterday saying, oh, maybe do I have to keep
Why would you do that? Why would you go into hormonal deprivation again and take the health risks that involves?
Do you not think that some of it is kind of the psychological impact as well, like we were talking about, the kind of changes? So for me, I absolutely agree with you on health issues, and it's really important to do everything that you can to kind of to stay healthy. But I think that the loss, for me anyway, my own perspective is that the loss of the hormones is part of the psychological changes that happen with growing older, and that's necessary. And I wonder if we kind of like take it forever, that we don't quite undergo those changes in the way that we would otherwise. I don't know, it's complicated.
I think so many women undergo some horrible changes in perimenopause and realise, that they have to do something about it. But I don't think there should be a debate of one way or the other. I think we should be all and everything, and we shouldn't sort of, be binary about it, because everybody's different, and, but the long-term health things are fantastic, and we are lucky not to be at such risk as we were, for those of us who can take it, and we are lucky to be able to take it. One last question.
I think that was going to be my question, but what I really wanted to say was that can you really burn it down and start again if you're on HRT? And would some of your stories be different if the women had HRT?
I think you almost answered your own question there, didn't you?
Here we go, say it again.
Just that I can make a comment that, I went on to HRT because I was feeling so bad, and I feel like it's all still happening. I am going into menopause, and I feel like everything you're talking about and the transformation is still happening. So it feels like the HRT is kind of softening, for me anyway, and that it's all still happening anyway. So it feels kind of supportive, but not that it's preventing in any transition.
Well, I'm very glad that we are all transforming in our own ways. Have you got a last thing you want to say, Sharon, for the whole... Just some advice.
No. I don't think so. Put on the spot like that, probably not.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all coming, and Sharon will be signing books. I'll be signing books afterwards.
Thank you so much.